Coming up, does Bears general manager prefer Brian Flores over Ben Johnson? We're going to talk about that, plus a couple of other nuggets in the Bears coaching search as the Bears have one more game against the Packers tomorrow. Make sure to subscribe. Join us for that, our final watch party of the Bears season. And thank you guys so much for 112,000 subscribers. Y'all's support during this train wreck of a few months has been outstanding. We'll go live about 10:45 for a noon kickoff, noon Central Time for Bears versus Packers. So be sure to join us. We appreciate the love, the support. We'll continue to crank out content. And after tomorrow, coaching search really ramps up at that point. I'm Harrison Graham. Is Brian Flores firmly in the mix to be the next Chicago Bears head coach? The buzz between Flores and the Bears continues to be there. He certainly seems to be one of the better, or at least more talked about coaches in this cycle as we approach Black Monday. I want to get to something Albert Breer said here, then we'll kind of react. He said, this was on a mailbag, and he was asked about Flores and the Bears, and he said, yes, he is a candidate. He's a Boston College teammate of Ryan Poles. He's in Minnesota, where Kevin Warren worked for a decade and a half, and reviews have come back from the Vikings to Warren raving about the job Flores has done. He'll have to answer for what went wrong with Tua Tagovailoa in Miami, given that he'd have a young quarterback to raise in Chicago, of course, Caleb Williams. But yes, I expect the Bears to take a long look at Flores. So he's definitely in the mix, according to Albert Breer, who's been well tapped in with the Bears since Poles has been here. And look, I like Brian Flores. He's a good candidate. We'll talk more about that in a second. I just have two big questions, and these are two major questions when it comes to Flores' candidacy that if you don't get great answers to in the interview process, to me, I don't think you can hire him. If you do get good answers, okay. I think he's a top 3-4 candidate. Is he number one for me? No, it's going to continue to be Ben Johnson. We'll talk about him in a second. But number one, can he connect with Caleb Williams, and can he help Caleb Williams grow? Because fair or not, he did not like Tua. It's one thing to not like the quarterback you have. It's another to wear him down to the point where Tua almost felt like he was abused in a way. Now, that's he said, she said stuff. But the reality is number one, I'm not hiring a coach to begin with that doesn't think Caleb can be the guy. That doesn't mean Caleb will be the guy, but you're not going to bring someone in here that right away wants to pivot off of Caleb Williams. Like, that's just not going to happen. So first, he has to believe in him. And second, you have to feel good about the developmental plan, which brings us to this one. Can Brian Flores hire a good offensive coordinator? Because when he was with the Miami Dolphins, he had 4 offensive coordinators in 3 years. And I've actually defended Flores' run in Miami. Remember that first year Stephen Ross, the owner, was offering him $100,000 per loss to tank, and Flores refused to tank, and they went 5-11 on a team that many thought could go 0-16, 1-15. Like, they were overachieving massively, and they ended up drafting Tua. He was like, I'm not tanking. So he's got that type of mindset. Then he had back-to-back 9-win seasons. So Brian Flores is a coach who is very capable in terms of overachieving. Those teams were not that good, and he was able to do a pretty good job. But again, is he the right guy for this young quarterback? Like, I think there's a good argument to be made that Brian Flores would be better served for a team that already has a veteran quarterback in place. Like, Jerry Jones would never hire him because he's suing the league. But if Dallas opened up, they've got Dak Prescott. That would make a logical on paper sense. Now, here's what I know. Brian Flores would be a major culture shift. He is a guy that's willing to make people uncomfortable. And I think there's value in that. I think this team could use that. You heard Cole Kmet the other day, and I know all these people have opinions on Cole for whatever reason all of a sudden now. He basically said, look, our culture sucks. Regardless of who the coach is, hotshot coordinator, whatever, we need a major culture shift. And Brian Flores would certainly provide that. But he's a defensive guy. You got to unlock Caleb Williams. It's just, there's a lot of questions. And if you can't get those two big ones answered, OC and ability to connect with the young quarterback, I think that's a tough sell to the fan base. More on Flores in a second and tying Ben Johnson into it back with Ryan Poles. But first, do got to tell you about our sponsor, Prize Picks. You want to make money? You want to get in on the action with all these big games just around the corner and basketball, hockey games as well? Get going with Prize Picks. Daily fantasy made easy at prizepicks.com/CLNS. Use the code CLNS to get a $50 bonus when you first sign up and play for $5. You do have to launch your first lineup of $5. And once you do, they're going to send you $50 into your account, more money to play with, more lineups to set. 2 or more players in your lineups, pick more, pick less. For example, you could have more on Caleb Williams passing yards, less on Jordan Love's passing yards this weekend if you want to go that route. You could bring other teams, other players, other sports into your lineups. As long as it's at least 2 players on 2 or more different teams, you are good to go. You can win up to 1,000 times your money on certain entries. Turn $10 into 10,000 if you win. So get started today. PrizePicks.com/CLNS. Use the code CLNS. We appreciate PrizePicks for sponsoring today's show. All right, I do want to get to a quote from Charlie Campbell. He works for Walter Campbell Football. They've been around forever. He's not one of these top insiders, so take it with a grain of salt. We're definitely in internet rumor season, but here's what he had to say, bringing Ben Johnson into this and just the whole Bears coaching search as a whole. He says, quote, Lions offensive coordinator Ben Johnson wants the job, but Ryan Poles has reservations. There's a lot of belief that Johnson would push Poles out. Johnson is said to want Commanders assistant GM Lance Newmark as his general manager. Newmark was with Johnson in Detroit. Poles has a history with Vikings defensive coordinator Brian Flores, and Flores is a top candidate for Poles. Now, let me be absolutely clear. I don't know if this report is accurate. Even the big insiders don't get the full information necessarily this time of year. So we do have to take this quote-unquote report with the grain of salt, like we do most reports. But when there's big rumors out there, I'm going to react to them. And let me be very, very clear here. This cannot happen. You cannot allow Ryan Poles to conduct a search and eliminate candidates if he's concerned about his own status within the organization. And that is why I've said for weeks now that you're probably better off just firing him and bringing in a new GM. Now, I'm not saying he couldn't run this team moving forward and have success and right some of the wrongs and build the offensive line. I'm not saying he's incapable, but I just cannot live in a world where Ben Johnson is interested in the Bears and ultimately it doesn't work out because of Ryan Poles. That would be beyond infuriating. Beyond infuriating. And this is not to say Brian Flores is a bad candidate. He's a strong candidate. Not hiring Ben Johnson because of Ryan Poles, that would be the issue. Bringing in Flores is not the issue. He's a good candidate. But it can't be you settle for him because, Ryan Poles, Ben Johnson, that marriage wasn't going to work. I like Brian Flores. He'd probably be my 3rd or 4th guy right now. He would not be a bad hire. But if he's the Bears' 3rd or 4th guy and gets pushed up to 1 because Ben Johnson didn't want to work with Ryan Poles and Mike Vrabel didn't like the setup of the organization, that's on the Bears setup. Fix your freaking power structure for once in your life. Just do it. Let's hire Poles. Let's have a list of candidates, finalists for him to choose from. Let's choose the worst of the 3 and Matt Eberflus. Let's double down and bring him in last year. Oh, and by the way, after Poles and Eberflus's first year, we're going to bring in Kevin Warren. You now report to him. The whole thing, it's a jigsaw puzzle that no one can ever figure out because it's pretty ridiculous to figure out. Come on, man. I like Flores. The defense would be really good. If he ends up being the choice, I don't think it's some disaster hire like some people do. He's a good football coach. He would run a tight ship. His creativity on defense would get much more out of the defense than you got this year. But don't let Ryan Poles be the reason that you can't land Ben Johnson. Doesn't mean you're going to get him either way. But that cannot be the case. It just cannot be the case. Where does Brian Flores rank on your guys' list? Again, he's pretty high for me. I'd have him as high as 3, as low as 5, somewhere in there. I do want to go offense, so that knocks him down a couple notches, but I like his mindset. I like his no BS mentality. I tweeted out a clip from a YouTube video from the Vikings YouTube account from their last game against the Packers last week. And it was one of those sights and sounds videos. Him and Kevin O'Connell were mic'd up. We saw a lot of like Flores in that clip, his intensity on the sideline. I mean, I really liked what I saw. So I like Flores. I wouldn't mind if he was the guy, but it's one thing if you just go through this full search, you have a lot of guys interested, and he just emerges as the top guy. Okay, so be it. It's another thing to want Ben Johnson, not get him because Ryan Poles isn't willing to give up power, or the Bears aren't willing to move on from him, and then you have to pivot to Flores. Like, that's two different situations, in my opinion. Okay, more Ben Johnson to the Jags buzz. This clip's been going around. A lot of people have weighed in on it, so I'll weigh in here. So, 1010 radio in Jacksonville. They're expected to fire Doug Peterson and potentially Trent Baalke, their GM. Greg Huntington, who played for the Jags, was a guest on the show, is really close with Mark Brunell, who is the quarterback's coach for the Lions. He still has a home in Jacksonville. Brunell does, played there. And Huntington basically said that Ben Johnson wants the Jags job. Like, that's the job he's eyeing. He still talks with Brunell, this Huntington guy, all the time. And last he had heard is that Johnson was interested in this job and that he would potentially bring Brunell with him back down to Jacksonville, where I think his wife still lives full-time, Brunell's, and he could join Ben Johnson maybe as like the OC or something like that. Look, I think, and there's a lot of theories out there that we've seen. I saw DeBear's blog put out there today that he doesn't think Ben Johnson actually wants the Jags job. He thinks he's leveraging Jacksonville to have the Bears respond and put their best 2 feet forward because that's the job he wants. Who knows? I will say this. The only two jobs we've heard linked for Johnson are Jacksonville and Chicago. I don't think he'll interview with the Jets. I don't think he wants to go to the Saints with no future at quarterback, no cap situation. Like, I don't think he's interested in that. I think he likes both of these jobs for different reasons. The AFC South is pretty weak. He probably feels like he could get the most out of Trevor Lawrence and be an annual contender in that division. And he obviously knows the NFC North very well. The Bears have a young, talented quarterback in Caleb Williams, a lot of cap space and draft picks. So I do think it's one of these two. But as I said about a week ago, and I'll say it again here, if he chooses Jacksonville over you, that's a pretty big indictment. I don't ever want to hear, again, if he truly has the choice at both, if he chooses Jacksonville over Chicago, about the Bears being this brand franchise, charter franchise. The Jags are an expansion franchise from the 90s. The Bears have been around over 100 years. That shit gets thrown out the window if he legitimately chooses Jacksonville over Chicago. So we'll see what happens there. I'm not sure what to believe in terms of is it a leverage play? Does he really like the Jags job? I don't know. But we're going to find out soon. We're going to find out very, very soon. And remember, as we talk Flores and Ben Johnson here, they play each other Sunday night. So A, go watch that chess match, as those are two high candidates on the Bears list, it would appear. And B, the winner of that game, the Bears can virtually interview next week. The loser, the earliest you can interview them is 3 days after their first playoff game, virtually. So keep that in mind. Okay. Real quick, Dianna Russini dropped some nuggets this morning, including this one on Mike Vrabel, saying that, A, that his interview with the Jets yesterday went very, very well, so that's somewhat notable, and B, that the Bears and the Saints are expected to interview Vrabel next week. So it doesn't sound like the Bears, obviously games tomorrow, but we're going to take advantage of bringing in Vrabel before their final game here. How much does that matter? I don't know, but Jets got a head start, so that's somewhat notable. But expect Vrabel to interview next week. And again, I think the winner of Vikings-Lions, I would expect the Bears to conduct a interview with either Ben Johnson or Brian Flores, depending on who wins that game. She also mentioned Anthony Weaver, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Because not that her reporting's inaccurate, I think it is, but Anthony Weaver is the Dolphins defensive coordinator. And look, He's considered a bright young guy. I think he's 43, 44 years old. He fits this leader of men mantra that keeps getting thrown around. He was with the Ravens as their defensive line coach last year, which was one of the better defenses in a long time. So he's been around the Harbaughs, all that stuff. I'm not saying this guy couldn't be a good head coach. But if you hire Anthony Weaver, who was a DC for 1 year in 2020 with the Texans and now 1 year this year for the Dolphins, like compared to every other name we've heard, he is easily the least qualified. Doesn't mean he couldn't be good. Doesn't mean he couldn't be the right guy. But like, are you really in position to go that route? Like, if you really want to go the leader of men mantra, Mike Vrabel and defense, Mike Vrabel and Brian Flores, and even Aaron Glenn are far more qualified. So like, if you're going to do that, there are guys who have held their posts for much longer and are qualified. Like, can we just get the qualified guy for once? The one that makes sense? Like, Matt Eberflus 3. This would be like hiring Matt Eberflus. Doesn't mean it's a 0% chance it works, but let's increase our percentages a little bit. Let's use some logic a little bit here. Anthony Weaver could be the next Bill Belichick. I have no idea, but that would seem insane if he is the guy that the Bears brought in to be their next head coach. So again, we'll see. We'll see. After the game tomorrow, you're going to see some more reports and chatter trickle out, and we will have that covered here on Chicago Bears Now. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday. Join us tomorrow for Bears versus Packers. Can Chicago pull off a miracle and beat Green Bay for the first time since 2018? We'll be here to cover it all. Myself, producer Colin, so subscribe and join us for that. My name is Harrison Graham. We will see you guys soon.